KATABASIS podcast, episode 2, Bloodwork and nutrition implications for the beginner, for the general population who doesn't know where to start. By the end of this episode, you guys should understand basic hematology, iron, copper, omega-3s. Basically, so you can go into your, and we're going to give you a resource as well. The link is in the description. We're going to email you out a resource so you can go into your doctor and be like, what blood test do I get? How do I know which one to get? We've got you covered. It's going to be in the description, and we're going to tell you about that later. Ben?
That's it, man. What we're not going to do today, though, is go over everything.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to keep it really simple because there'll be undoubtedly more of these podcasts, and we'll have some guests on, actually, which we can dive a little bit deeper into some of them. But for now, we're going to go over red blood cells. We're going to go over iron studies. We'll talk about a few minerals, zinc, copper. And the reason we're going to start here is because this is the kind of stuff which people, they supplement with all the time. B vitamins, iron, we're like looking at those from a supplemental standpoint or optimizing the nutrition. How do I get more B12 and stuff like that? So we're just going to enter in, just capturing people's interest in that side of things, and then discuss it a little bit, what you'll see on the blood work.
Yeah, so now the average person can walk away with like practical takeaways about what to do with basic blood work so they can start feeling better, performing better in the gym, having a better quality of life, because so many people can't afford or don't have the means yet, or even the want yet to pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars to get like a biochem consult with us or do full coaching. So this can be a little bit of an introduction to get you guys started, to walk away with some practical things that you can do to feel better and perform better and be healthier.
That's it.
Let's go. Let's start off with the first page you'll see, usually on a blood test, is usually this, full blood examination. Ben, do you want to start off with perhaps why this is important to measure and the role of our red blood cell in basic function and energy for the human?
Yeah, exactly. So like a full blood exam or a complete blood count, we usually cover red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. For the point of today, let's just stick to red blood cells because we want to kind of keep tying it back to nutrition, and that's a good place to start versus getting involved in the immune system and things like that. So really, in order to start the conversation somewhere, it's like, well, we're going to be discussing hemoglobin, red blood cell count, hematocrit, and we'll go over red cell distribution width as well. But before we even go through those markers, it's like, well, what is a red blood cell doing?
What is it?
Okay. A red blood cell, for all intents and purposes, is grabbing oxygen and delivering it around the body. That's its payload. It's got to deliver this oxygen there so that we can utilize that oxygen within our energy synthesis machinery, basically. We drop it off in the mitochondria, the powerhouses of the cell.
Right.
And it's what's called the final electron acceptor there, which basically all it means is if we want to create ATP, which is the currency of the body, that's what we pay to do things, if you like, we need to be dropping off that oxygen. And in order to do that, we need well-formed and well-functioning red blood cells. And when we don't have that, like if we have low levels of these things and the things inside the red blood cells that help us deliver that oxygen, such as the hemoglobin, for instance, we're going to end up with suboptimal oxygen delivery, which is basically forms of anemia. Okay, and so that's where we're going to start.
And then what's an indication that you can think, how do I know if this will affect me? Let's go over some symptoms perhaps that are very common, that can be ameliorated and reduced and managed very well through nutrition. Fatigue, like shallow breath, poor circulation, cold hands and feet, headaches, like poor exercise performance. Like, why am I suddenly, like my gym performance isn't good? It's been slowly getting worse over the years, becoming more fatigued. And what's also implicated in this inside a red blood cell is also, we'll talk about iron later, is this little heme molecule. And heme is like, it's a part of an iron molecule. And so you need enough iron and also copper, as we'll talk about, to manage the function and health of the red blood cell. So iron is going to be important for later. We'll talk about B12 and folate and other things like that are cofactors to this. But that's a basic red blood cell. Next, should we talk about anemia and how it presents, perhaps?
Yeah, well, you just mentioned like a bunch of the symptoms then with anemia, and basically anemia is like a suboptimal delivery of oxygen to the tissues, and then you end up with potentially a lot of problems like you just mentioned. But I think the story, like in a way, like it kind of starts with iron, so maybe we can start it there, because I like this because you can bring it back to digestion, and it's just something you can kind of like anchor in right now with. So when you eat a steak or something that contains iron in it, then basically it goes down, you chew it, it goes down into the stomach, and then we pass it into the small intestines, and basically we're going to absorb that iron. And there's a couple of factors that come into play right here, but the job of the iron is we're going to take that iron into the body, and we're going to take it to various parts where it's important. And one of those parts is we're going to take it to the bone marrow, where we create red blood cells, because it's important for the synthesis of heme, which goes into hemoglobin, which is this protein that holds onto the oxygen as we deliver it through the body. So if we have an inadequate supply of iron coming in through the diet, or poor absorption of that iron, we're having a digestive issue, or perhaps we're low in iron because we've got losses coming in, we've got bleeding and things like that. That could be an issue as well. And all of these can lead to problems with red blood cell synthesis and the hemoglobin synthesis. And that's when we can start to see these values drop, and some of the problems from that.
Yeah, so you'll see red blood cell drop. We'll look at MCV, mean corpuscular volume, the average size. That's the average size of the red blood cell. And we won't just look at one figure. We'll look. What you want to do is you want to look at, or a good doctor or a good practitioner, they'll look at the hematology, and then we'll combine that with the iron panel to confirm our suspicions of, do you have iron deficiency anemia or another form of anemia? I don't know if you want to talk about it now, but like, are the boats of transporting iron around the body, do you have too many of them? Do you have too many like transferrin molecules? Are those boats and transferrin molecules too saturated and filled, which we can talk about why that's important. And then you combine those two pictures together to form a complete practical picture about what to do about that.
Yeah, so like in an optimal situation, you have adequate iron coming into the body. That iron will, supply enough towards making the red blood cells. It's going to be stored in this compound called ferritin. So ferritin is our global storage of iron, and we store that within our liver and also within our white blood cells. And so in those situations, what's going to happen is if everything's optimal, we have an adequate supply, adequate creation of hemoglobin, an adequate creation of red blood cells. Those red blood cells are of the adequate size. So the sizing of those cells is really important. We're going to talk about small cells versus large cells in a second, right? But if the sizing is important, the number's important, and they have the right amount of oxygen-containing hemoglobin within them, then everything is going to plan. You know what I mean? You've got good oxygen delivery, and we are sweet. There's no anemia, no symptoms, and so on and so forth. Where things go wrong is when, obviously, there's a problem within that. And one of the first things that we'll see if we go to an iron panel is that iron panel will be disrupted, and then there will be the red blood cell count and the hemoglobin are kind of like a lagging indicator of your iron status. And the reason is because a red blood cell's lifespan is around about 100 to 120 days. So if you were to stop eating all iron now, your iron panel will start to shift in the direction, so the sub-indices of the iron panel, which we'll go into a second, and we'll start to see that will start to look low. But on the red cell count, that's not going to be affected just yet. That may not be affected for a couple of months, right? Until the effect of that low iron is being seen in the creation of new red blood cells and new hemoglobin.
And this is how you could be proactive. You can look at the iron panel and you can be proactive ahead of time. And it's also why people are like, oh, all of a sudden I feel fatigued. I feel tired. I haven't really changed much recently. How recently? Couple of weeks? A month? 2 months? Well, if we talked about, it's like 3-4 months to make a new red blood cell. It's like, oh yeah, I did make those changes like a season ago. And so think further back in time when you're trying to problem solve your energy problems. And also ferritin, just something to look out for. It's called an acute phase reactant. So when the ferritin is high, you can usually is an indicator of inflammation or infection going around in the body. So you just watch out for that if that's elevated, because iron can be very oxidizing. It can be very inflammatory in high amounts. So you want to be careful of making sure ferritin doesn't stay high for long, or at least investigate why that could be.
Yeah. And it's like, so like what we just mentioned then was like if iron's not coming in or an adequate supply, we're going to see red blood cell numbers drop, okay, on your panel. We're going to see the hemoglobin drop. Okay, we're going to see the hematocrit, and the hematocrit is basically just the percentage of red blood cells within the blood draw. Okay, so it's the solids, if you like. So whenever you get like a 10 ml blood draw, for instance, you'll basically see them pull it out, and then they'll centrifuge it, so they'll spin it down, and the packed elements, the formed elements down the bottom, that's called the hematocrit. And it's basically just the percentage, and the rest is the plasma. So if you have a hematocrit and you see that come up as like 0.50, it means 50% of that is red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets, and the other 50% is plasma. So in iron deficiency, what would typically happen is the red cells are low, the hemoglobin's low, and the hematocrit is low. But this brings up another important part of the conversation, which is one of the easiest ways to stuff up your blood results is to go in dehydrated.
Dehydration.
And the reason is that it causes hemoconcentration. So the plasma, so the watery stuff, it's mainly water. Okay, so when you're dehydrated, it's not like your blood cells decrease, but the volume of it because of the plasma will decrease. And so accordingly, the phlebotomist, the person taking out your blood, he's just got to take out 10 mils, right? But when they centrifuge that down, if you're dehydrated, it's going to artificially elevate the amount of formed solids, the red blood cells. And so that hematocrit might, instead of looking at 0.5 or 50%, it might show up as 55% now. So imagine this scenario. Imagine you're anemic and you've got low red blood cells, but then you go in and you get a blood test while you're dehydrated.
You look normal now.
You look normal. And this is what we see. This is not as uncommon as what you'd think. A lot of people go in and they're anemic and haven't drunk enough water, and everything looks perfect.
Isn't that crazy? Because that's such a big implication to changing someone's quality of life. Oh, the doctor doesn't tell you to hydrate. You don't have any gut. You're unaware. How many people drink 1 to 1.5 liters before 8, 9 a.m. and blood test? Rarely. That is why in the document, in the description, we'll put in our bios, we'll put everywhere for you on Instagram, there's very clear indicators of how much water you should drink and that you need to be hydrated before a blood test. Otherwise, you can make yourself think, you can pretend or create a facade that everything's fine when it's not.
Yeah. And there are some telling things that, I'll sort of go into now that hopefully, even if that situation happens, well, first and foremost, you just want to retest. You don't want that because it just it's a variable that you don't need in there.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears for a second so I can explain something else. So if we had a B12 or a folate deficiency, where these B vitamins are really important is in the maturation of a red blood cell. So red blood cells start from these progenitor cells. They're kind of like ready to become a matured red blood cell. And in the process of doing that, we need adequate B12 and folate. Otherwise, what happens? They get stuck and they're bigger than what we want them to be. Okay, and so that's suboptimal, and it's called like macrocytic anemia. So big cell anemia, and that leads to suboptimal oxygen delivery as well. So you could have a situation where at some stage you're iron deficient and you've got small red blood cells. You could have a B12 and or folate deficiency, and at a different stage, you've got big red blood cells. You can have them both at the same time, okay? And this leads us to one of the other stats we're going to talk about, which is mean corpuscular volume, or MCV. And a lot of people are aware of this because what it's basically telling you is like, what's the size of the red blood cell? And but it's the average. This is what's important. So if you have a iron deficiency and you have small red blood cells and you have a B12 or a folate or both of those deficiency, you have big red blood cells and you take the average,
It's in the middle.
you look great.
Yeah.
So MCV might be smack on 90 and you're like, tick, that looks great as well. And so this is where we need to use the red cell distribution width. So the RDW on a full blood exam is like the little engine that could, man. Like it gets overlooked all the time, but this is the thing that will tell you often if what you're seeing on an MCV is trustworthy or not. And the reason being is what the RDW is, it's measuring the variability or the uniformity, I could say, in the sizes of the red blood cells. So if that number is nice and low, if you see that around like 10 to 11, for instance, that's indicating uniformity. Okay, so the red blood cells are all the same size. If we start getting that up to 14, 15, 16 with the RDW, that's telling you that there's a lot of variability in the sizes. Okay, so that could be a situation if you saw an RDW come back at 15 or 16 and the MCV, the size, the mean size looked normal, you couldn't trust that. You're like, no, actually, I've probably got some nutritional deficiencies that may have contributed, might have some small red blood cells and some big red blood cells.
So then you're like, okay, you have a range. MCV is normal. You got to look at RDW, like, oh, it's high. Red flag, 14, 15, 16%. What do we do then? Well, then we look down the blood test and we look at B12, we look at folate, iron. But then another problem, see, it's a cascade of like problems that can occur. You look at your serum B12. Serum is like floating around in the bloodstream. And we know it's a very unreliable marker for B12 sufficiency. So then, what test may we do instead to elucidate that?
Yeah. So look. What'll often happen, when you go into the doctors, is they'll go the full blood exam first. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like if they're looking to do the least amount of tests possible,
which they are,
that's what you're gonna get. And so hopefully, like if you see any abnormalities of like what we've talked about so far, it's like, well, the next step then is to start running some confirmations. It's like check out the B12, check out the folate. You could be asking for a marker of B12 trans. Cobalamin, which is a better marker than just serum B12, for instance. And you could be asking for an additional marker, which you and I both love, which is homocysteine. Okay, so homocysteine is involved in the methionine pathway, and basically to convert that back into methionine, we need adequate B12 and folate. So it's a very sensitive marker for the absence or the deficiency or inadequacy of B12 or folate. It's not specific, but if that's elevated, one, it's a bad thing because it's a risk factor for cardiovascular issues. Yep. But two, it's telling you, okay, there is definitely at a functional level a problem with our sufficiency of B12 and or folate. So you're combining these things together. You're looking at what have I got in the red cell indices? What are the size of the red blood cells that I've got there? What's the uniformity? And you're starting to see here, oh, maybe I have an iron problem. Maybe I have a B12 or a folate problem. Maybe I have both and I don't really, and then I need to go and be looking at, well, let's look at some tests to get some more information. The B12, the folate, the holotranscobalamin, and the homocysteine, they're all ways of following those vitamins up very well to start getting more details on how you're going to come at this from a nutritional level and or a supplemental angle.
That's beautiful. And you could see the cascade of the follow-throughs of tests that you need to keep investigating to confirm your suspicions. I had a note here that we should probably mention, like vegans, vegetarians, like notoriously high in homocysteine, don't have adequate B12, puts pressure on other nutrients like choline. And so you should be very conscious if you are a plant-based eater or someone who doesn't eat a lot of red meat, which is very common with females, it's a really good idea to look at this marker. And our range is, the research in our range seems to be about under 10, under 11 for homocysteine. And Dr. Chris Masterjohn is a really good resource you guys can look up. He's done a lot of summaries on the research on homocysteine. And it's a bit overwhelming. It's becoming overwhelming on the associations between like Alzheimer's, dementia, brain aging, cognitive function, gray matter, like neurological disorders. If you have high homocysteine, which is much more common if you're someone who's older in their 30s and 40s and 50s. And so that's something that a doctor will almost never test for.
Yeah. And it's because what you're going into there, it's like the canary in the coal mine of so much more as well. Like we're talking about like red blood cells right now, but elevated homocysteine is basically telling you have a problem with methylation. Do you know what I mean? And methylation, we're not going to go into that today because that's
too heavy.
And it's also you could have a problem in like your transsulfuration pathway, which is the synthesis of taurine and glutathione and the antioxidant defense system and all those kind of things as well. So yeah, in my opinion, trying to get like the B12, the folate, the homocysteine done pretty much at the same time you're running your full blood exam is a really good idea because it means that you don't have to go back. If these tests are cheap and easy to get where you live, then like I just see it as an easy way to incorporate it into the initial exam.
100%. And I just want to make a side note. Probably should have said at the start. Why do you even want to get all these blood tests to begin with? Because you want to set a baseline. You want to set a baseline of what normality is for you. Even if you're healthy, you're like, oh, I feel fine. That's awesome. You will not feel fine forever. A year, 2 years, 5 years. Donnie might feel fine right now. Donnie, I want you to get your blood tests because we're going to get a baseline. Because when you don't feel as fine, we have a baseline to compare against the relative difference. Just want to say that.
Yeah. And it's like, so one of the things that, I've said many times before is that if you are on a diet, like a structured way of eating with your meal plan, and let's say it's for a fat loss journey and it involves a caloric deficit, and so the reduction of food, then the more you reduce the food, there is a tendency to put more pressure on the selection of those foods from a nutrient density standpoint to hit your RDIs to sufficient levels. But what also tends to accompany like low calorie inputs in a dieting phase? High outputs, you know what I mean? So we're combining, we're cutting the calories, we're cutting the, potentially cutting like the inputs in terms of the vitamins and minerals, and we're increasing our output and our expenditures as well. So someone who's like doing a healthy thing as such, like the principle of what we're doing is trying to achieve optimal health, right? In the process of doing that, sometimes we can underestimate just the need to pay attention. That you're basically pulling two levers at once.
I see.
Okay, and it's creating extra pressure on either what you eat, the kind of fortification and supplements that you use to go through it, and potentially like investigating your blood work.
Which is why it's probably a really good idea to supplement with a general, all-encompassing vitamin mineral mix in the context of a caloric deficit. It's probably a pretty good idea.
It gets hard. Like I've put posts up before where, trying to achieve the RDIs on a 1,600 calorie meal plan, like you try doing that and you realize how hard it is, so it can be done, but it's like, if people want to enjoy like a certain amount of like flexibility from preference standpoints and adaptability for social situations and those kind of things as well, you run into walls pretty quickly if you're not helping yourself out with a little form of supplementation.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that to cause distress or concern with people like in the acute setting, but I think it's just saying, hey, it's worthwhile paying attention to that, because if you do extended timeframes of aggressive calorie deficits with high outputs as well, think about doing it intelligently, and having this attention paid to these particular nutrients.
100%. Okay. So basic hematology, B12, folate, iron. Is there anything you want to add there? Should we move on to maybe...
I want to explain the iron panel a bit more.
Okay.
So because it's to explain the red blood cell panel, it's kind of an iron story. The iron story explains that well because it gets you thinking about, hemoglobin, it gets you thinking about the red blood cell count, and it also describes if you are iron deficient, ending up with smaller red blood cells, which has got to do with the size of the red blood cells.
Should we do the boat analogy? I like it.
Yeah.
Do it publicly.
Yeah. So if you, let's go back to the story about eating the iron. Okay. So you absorb you eat the iron. Okay. You're digesting it, absorbing it. Now you can have iron from animals like heme iron, or you can have non-heme iron that's supplied by plants. The fact of the matter is heme iron has kind of one less step to get absorbed into the intestines and thus into your body, which is why sometimes you'll hear people say, if you're taking this certain supplement or plant-based iron, to consume some vitamin C with it, because vitamin C is an antioxidant, it'll reduce it, give it an electron, and then it's able to basically be absorbed that way. So it's important from that standpoint.
Pause there. Tip for plant-based eaters, consume things high in vitamin C. One of the highest vitamin C fruits, kiwis, consume that with your plant-based iron, and you're going to do a better job at absorbing it.
Yeah. So when the iron gets into those first cells, like in the intestines, we basically then have to get that iron out the back end of the intestines and into the body, into circulation, and it's going to go into a transporting protein, like a transporter, So on the blood panel, you'll see this as transferrin. Now, transferrin, we use the bus analogy a lot for carnitine, right? So you could use buses, boats, whatever it is. But basically, the iron's going to sit in here and be transported to various parts of the body. We mentioned before it's going to go to the long bones for red blood cell synthesis and heme synthesis. It's going to go to the white blood cells. It's going to be going to the liver to be stored in ferritin as well. But there's a guy that loads the buses, And so that's a protein, and it's a copper-dependent protein called ceruloplasmin that's sort of on the basolateral or the back end of the cells, if you like, in the intestines. And so if you are deficient in copper And most of the copper in your body lives in this ceruloplasmin enzyme. That's where it is, right? If you are deficient in copper, then that guy who's putting the iron in the transporting proteins to go everywhere through the body is not going to be able to do his job.
He's just tired. He's fatigued.
And this is why, I want to say this, is that like, we're talking about iron, but you can see already, like, it's important knowing your iron panel, but not knowing your copper status. It's kind of like you're missing a very important piece of the information, because a copper deficiency can look exactly like an iron deficiency. Okay, because it creates the problem of iron not being able to be utilized and transported well throughout the body. Okay, but so the story in terms of like what you'll see on a blood test is this: you'll see serum iron in your iron studies. You will see the transferrin protein, so the amount of transporter that you've got. You will see the saturation, which refers to the percentage of the transport proteins that have iron in them. Okay, and then you'll see ferritin, which is the global like storage of iron that we have. So when all things are operating fine, this is what happens. Serum iron looks kind of normal. Not the greatest marker in the world anyway, because it fluctuates a lot with like dietary iron intake. So nice to see. Don't hold too much weight in it though. Okay, if you see it a little bit low, a little bit high, or whatever. In normal conditions, like, there will be adequate iron for all parts of the body that need it. And then so the transport proteins, the transferrin, will look normal as well. The saturation is probably going to be somewhere between 25 to 40%. That's kind of like a normal range of the percentage of those buses or those boats that have the iron in it. And ferritin should probably be somewhere within 50 to 150. So your storage of iron is good as well. Let's go back to the iron deficiency scenario. So iron deficient state, what's basically going to happen is the body senses, hey, I don't have enough iron. It's going to signal to the liver, make more buses. Okay, you need to make more buses. And why? Because those buses are going to go all throughout the body hunting down this iron. So on your blood panel in the iron studies, you'll see transferrin start to rise. And you'll concurrently usually see saturation start to drop, because you're producing more buses, more transport proteins, and most of them are empty because they're looking for the iron. They don't have it yet. And this is where you tend to see like a very nice clinical picture of like an iron deficient state. You might also see ferritin on the low side. So maybe it's 50, maybe it's 40, maybe it's 30. But you mentioned a confounding factor with ferritin before, that a ferritin is an acute phase reactant. So in the face of inflammation or infection, you will see ferritin rise. And it's got nothing to do with representing your global iron storage state. Okay, it's just that's what the body's doing. And it goes into another conversation about like whether or not we're trying to keep iron away from the bugs during an infection. You know, so when we're in that inflamed state, so we're going to take the iron away because the bugs like to use that, the bacteria, to thrive as well. Okay, so in an iron deficient state, that's generally what you're going to see. Transferrin goes up and saturation goes down. Take the opposite scenario, too much iron, what do you see? You see transferrin drop, and you see saturation is through the roof. Okay, so they're two nice clinical pictures of a pattern that you'd see in an iron panel that would tend to indicate either iron deficiency or iron overload.
That was beautiful.
Yeah.
That was a beautiful synopsis on iron. Please watch that back, take notes, and be very skeptical, or have a healthy skepticism when your doctor comes in and says, hey, your ferritin is super low, the storage of iron. Let's get you on an iron supplement. Let's get you on Ferrograd C, make you constipated, right? Because you don't need a shit, right? Because that's what's a common symptom of iron supplements. And so you want to be skeptical of using one marker of ferritin because it's an incomplete picture. So just make sure you get transferrin saturation as well. So,
and if tying this back into copper, right? So if the iron panel doesn't look right, then what you really need to fill out this picture is like, well, what is my copper status? Do you know what I mean? Because if it's my iron panel not right because I'm not eating enough iron, is it because I'm not absorbing the iron?
That's another problem.
Like diarrhea, like IBS, like other issues and stuff like that. Or is it because I'm copper deficient and I don't have enough ceruloplasmin to convert the iron into a form and put it in the buses so that it can be transported around the body?
Yep.
Do you know what I mean? So this is why we sort of say, look, you can do this bit by bit. It's annoying to go and get multiple blood tests though, right?
Yeah.
So I don't really like having to do that. I'm sure our clients don't really like having to do that. Anyone listening to this podcast doesn't like having to go back like every 3 or 4 weeks to kind of get the next bit of information, which is why we try and encourage like finding a doctor who's kind of help you out with a solution to do at least these kind of labs with these nutrients and minerals, like just from the start. Okay. And I can probably bring in the other mineral that I had here right now, because I think this is important, especially for those people that are in the fitness industry. How many people do you know that supplement with high dose zinc?
I'm promoting it through the roof.
Man, everyone in fitness, like, at some stage or another, and kind of for good reason. Like, I completely understand it, because like zinc is really, really important. And as we train, we put a much higher demand on zinc intake than normal. And it's very important for all aspects of muscle growth and the immune system and the gut and everything like that. The problem is this: you can't just superdose things not thinking that you're going to affect something else. Okay. And so if you take a really high dose, and zinc is available in like 50 milligram tablets, and it's super cheap. So it's very common for someone to go, we all like, value is a great purchase motivator. Okay. So if you've got a choice between buying 20 milligram zinc and 50 milligram zinc, and you see that there's like 50 cents in between the two, most people, like, the value
is better.
Yeah, the value is there, right? So people will go with the higher dose. The problem when it comes to zinc and copper is it's doing really high dose zinc ongoing is the quickest way to give yourself a copper deficiency. It displaces the copper at the level of the gut with absorption, and it sort of sloughs off with the cells every couple of days, and we don't absorb the copper needed. Okay, so this is where it's really important to just not do these things in isolation. If you're going to supplement with zinc, go for it. Do the due diligence, see where your zinc levels are at. Ask to get your copper levels done as well. And that way you can make sure it's like that you're going to go with the dosage or a supplement maybe that covers both zinc and or copper, like a strategy that's not going to just give you another deficiency in a different mineral.
And so the point is, this is why we ask for these tests in that document. We want zinc, we want copper, we want homocysteine to put these pieces together. So when your doctor asks you why, you have a 1-2 sentence answer in that document or from this conversation. Now, I think this is going to be the case for you, but typically when we do our zinc copper tests, almost, I would say 80-20, usually free copper is really high off the charts and zinc is usually deficient. So for a temporary phase and period of time, we're going to supplement with, shout out, oysters, which we love, because that has the most highest amount of zinc, and it has some copper in there too. Mm-hmm. It's a good combination. For a period of time, and then retest in 3 to 6 months. So we're not doing it forever. It's a temporary period of time to help ameliorate some of the symptoms of anxiety or skin issues, or like poor sense of taste and smell, which low zinc and high copper can present with.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's like that panel that you can often get done is like a zinc, copper, and ceruloplasmin panel. We talked about the iron studies before. It's like, there's 4 markers in a typical iron studies. You can get zinc as an individual marker, you can get copper as an individual marker, or you can get like this zinc, copper, and ceruloplasmin that a lot of labs will do. Okay, so it's just a nice cost-effective way to look at everything there, and it really enhances your observations with your iron panel, okay, to make sure that what you're seeing, if there's an abnormality in the iron panel, isn't being influenced by a copper deficiency. Okay?
Exactly. Okay. And there was another thing. Oh yeah, like allergies. Like if you have an overactive like histamine response, like histamine's like this smoke alarm, right? Oh, why am I overreacting to grass and pollen, dust? Your body's kind of detecting it as a threat. There is a argument, and I've seen in quite a few clients, that improving zinc can improve that response. If you have allergies, have a look at your zinc too.
Absolutely. And so like let's go back to the start here, just to like overview things from a nutritional angle and or a supplement angle.
Sure.
So if we saw, an elevated MCV, okay, so we're seeing big red blood cells, and we then look at the B12 and it's kind of like on the lower side, and maybe you got your homocysteine done and it's on the higher side. You're starting to build up a lot of evidence now that you probably have like a B12 deficiency, okay? So then it'd be a case of like, well, what can you do from a nutritional angle that's got lots of B12?
Oysters. Organ meats.
You're looking at your proteins, right? And
meat.
it's so like, what happens if someone's their main priority is like white fish and white chicken out of their protein sources? What are you going to tell someone like that?
we're going to we're going to have a conversation about whether we can introduce some of these other foods if we can.
Yeah.
Right? Or if we need to, they're particularly deficient, we might even supplement.
Oh, absolutely, we might supplement. But I think what you want to do is have with that client, you want to say, listen, these are the protein choices that you tend to go to. Now, whether there's a preference thing involved, whether it's a preparation thing involved there as well. Yeah. And it's like, well, what kind of change can we do feasibly here? Because someone might tell you, I hate red meat. It's like, oh, okay, cool. That puts a larger emphasis on us looking towards a supplement there.
Yeah.
That's fine. But it's just about building out context, because we would like to do what we can do with food first,
yes,
and then look at what needs to be done with a vitamin support after that.
And so it's very easy to go ahead and buy a beef liver supplement, right? It's very easy it's not easy to eat liver. It's not easy for people. But this is where you want to be careful about just consuming high amounts of organ meats every day, Liver King style. I don't know, right? But I'm sure the Liver King's copper status is through the roof. But it's not even obvious. I wonder how he looks and he feels great. It's an N of 1, of course. But the point I'm trying to make is, if you just consume organ meats and just go beef liver life for the rest of your life, there are potential ramifications and consequences of chelating away a lot of zinc, particularly if you're not eating a whole food diet and you're not having oysters and high zinc foods. So you just want to be careful of the context of shoveling down organ meats just because you're fulfilling the healthy user bias.
Yeah, 100%. And so if it comes specifically with B12, I do feel like there's a lot of discussion that can be had around the food choices just in regards to the protein. Okay, so you're just what is the protein selection now? What's your ratio of fish to other white meats to red meats to offal meats and things like that, and have a feasibility discussion about what could be sustainably done over the course of any given week.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Just start small.
Yeah. And look, the unfortunate thing is, but I just want to be really transparent with this as well, is that you take liver. If a client says to you, hey, so if I eat 100 grams of liver, is that going to give me sufficient copper because I have a copper deficiency? And you'd be like, yeah, that's going to give you 10 to 14 milligrams of copper. But if they're going to do it in one hit, we run into a little bit of a problem. And that is that if you just take a bolus, one serve per week of a really high copper food or supplement, your body down-regulates the amount that it's going to absorb from that at any given time, because it's a big bolus at once, and so we have less absorption. That's just the way it does things. It'll do it with vitamin C. It'll do it with many nutrients as well. Does that make it a redundant strategy? No, I just think it's worth being transparent. The same with the oysters. Oysters is a really great way to elevate zinc, but guess what happens when you have a dozen oysters? You're going to get so much zinc, but a lot of that the body's not going to take up because it's a bolus at one time. The more optimal situation, which is never done, so I'm not saying this as a strategy, would be to have a couple of oysters per day.
No, I would say it's never done. We do. You know what we do? Here's what we can do. Practical. We can go meet it halfway, right? Get a dozen oysters, maybe 2, right? Get your lady over, get your man over, right? It's going to be a nice time, right? Then they last for about 3, max 4 days, right? I know you do a dozen at once. Better than nothing. Put it in the fridge. 3 a day, 4 a day, at least half the week. Yeah. We're on the way.
Absolutely.
I'm the oyster king.
And you could get tinned, yeah. You can get tinned oysters as well.
Oh, that's true.
But it's just worth pointing out, because we have a tendency to do that. So one of the things that I came up with for myself with liver was to ask my butcher to basically mince it through a couple of kilos of meat. So I would have that. I think I did a 10-to-1 ratio of beef mince to either lamb or beef liver. Yep. Now, actually, this raises another point. So people say about chicken liver and pate, and I'm like, look, it's really good from a vitamin A perspective. It's very good from a B12 perspective, but it doesn't have the copper. So if you showed up low on a copper, you can't just pate yourself into a copper sufficiency, okay? It needs to be beef or lamb liver, unfortunately.
That's a quote. That's a nerd-ass quote.
Yeah.
You can't pate yourself into a copper sufficiency.
That's right. So, and that's not to take away from pate. I mean, I love pate.
Shout out.
That's just the reality. You can make beef liver pate. I've made that. It's just very strong.
For most people, I Googled this for a couple clients. You can Google. I just get it delivered. Just go beef, mince, liver. And you can order a lamb or beef already made, mince, ready to go online from the butcher, delivered straight to your door. You don't even have to make it.
Yeah. And so there's a kind of that ratio, that 10-to-1 ratio is, in my experience with clients, it doesn't really affect the taste too much. They still can't taste it that much.
I accidentally told a client, No, I didn't tell her the ratio exactly, and she knows who she is. She's listening. We did, I think she did 500 grams of liver to 1 kilo of mince.
Decent.
Right? Heavy, hard in the paint. She didn't realize. She had a visceral, emotional reaction that I think she will avoid liver for years now. So just be careful of the ratio.
Yeah. And obviously these could be made into burgers. You could put them into like a pasta with like a tomato-based sauce and make like the equivalent of like a bolognese or something out of that. So it's a pretty easy way to kind of look at increasing those nutrients that we talked about.
I used to do the powder. You can get the liver powder. The powder, you can put it in a smoothie. Makes it pretty strong taste.
We're using that for the kids at the moment.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Oh, great. I'd grab a spoon because I didn't care. Some people won't care. Some people are like a bit crazy like me. I'll grab a spoon of it. I'll just put it in my mouth and I'll just chug water or a smoothie. It's very strong, but you can figure it out.
Yeah.
Just a spoonful of liver powder in your mouth. Don't worry about it.
Oh, look, actually, I didn't have this written down, but it would be amiss for me not to say this as well. So while we're talking about offal and iron and things like that, so spleen.
Yes.
Okay, so if you want to talk about like iron nutrient density situation, 100 grams of beef, which we would consider like a very commonly promoted food for iron intake, around about 2 to 2.2 milligrams of iron per 100 grams. Sardines might surprise you, about 2.9 to 3 milligrams of iron per 100 grams. So sardines, more iron than a steak. Liver, you're going to get up to about 5 to 10 milligrams of iron per 100 grams. Spleen, 30, 40, perhaps even 50 milligrams of iron per 100 grams.
Huge.
Okay, so I haven't had anyone that I've ever worked with actually find whole spleen and eat it. I have asked butchers for it. They made excuses not to get it for me. It seemed hard for them. But you can get it as a supplement. And I've used it in cases of severe anemia when I've had clients want to use a offal capsulated formula and with good success.
And just to give them a relative number, 18 is the RDI for females, if I recall correctly. Is
18 milligrams?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's somewhere like that.
Around 18, and the men's around 8 to 10.
Yeah.
Right? So to say that you could get 3, 4, 5 times the amount with supplemental spleen, you don't want to do it for a super long time, but you can really help reverse out of this iron deficiency quite comfortably in a short period of time with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So what have we talked about then? Iron as it relates to nutrition, supplements. Okay, so when it comes to supplements with iron, you can get some really high dose supplemental formulas. You know, they'll tend to start around maybe that 18 milligram mark and go all the way up to 50, 60 milligram mark. So they'll tend to go to that 60 milligram mark on the top end. But you can run into some of the side effects with some of these irons, like constipation and things like that. So I've recently been using an iron protein succinylate.
What brand?
We might put a link to the brand. You know, we don't need to promote any brands on here.
In the description.
Maybe in the description, yeah. But it's been good. Yeah, no symptoms of constipation and stuff like that. It's probably around about that 20 to 30 milligram mark in terms of dosage.
You want the brands? Hop in the Discord. We've got to give you guys something to come to. Okay.
So that's iron. Copper as well, when we talked about the liver. Yep. If you were looking at supplementing with something that's, like, let's say you wanted to supplement with something which had a good ratio of zinc to copper, you might find like a blend, like a trace mineral blend, copper, which might have those together in a ratio. And that ratios would normally go from about 10 to 1 in favor of zinc to maybe 20 to 1 in favor in zinc. So you can find them in those ratios, and it's like, well, which do you choose? I would just kind of look at your blood work and then make that decision based on that. You know, so if comparatively speaking, you needed more zinc than copper, go with the one with the high ratio of zinc. If not, you can probably head towards the lower one.
It's all specific based on your individual blood work. You don't just haphazardly supplement without understanding the internal biochem.
So iron, copper, we mentioned zinc, B12, folate. We haven't really touched on folate yet.
What's your folate range? What's the range you like for folate on the bloods?
I don't have it in front of me. Look, I think generally, like, you would find most labs that do, here in Australia anyway, I'm not too sure, like, internationally, but, like, most labs that do it, you would have it above, I think 45 is their cutoff. And I rarely see that number under the cutoff.
Yeah, same.
And I have a suspicion here, and I don't think it's because
acid?
people are eating too many vegetables.
Yeah, okay.
I think it's because one of the things that we do with like so many of our processed goods is fortify them with a lot of these B vitamins, and folic acid, which is like the synthetic form of folate, is present in heaps of them. In fact, when I've added up like clients' folic acid intake,
crazy.
like in initial consultation, sometimes I'm like, wow, there's like over a gram of, a milligram of folic acid coming in here. So it's measured in micrograms, and we would typically see like 300 to 400 micrograms as like a multivitamin dose or something. But then they might be taking a B vitamin with like another 400 micrograms. Folic acid is often added to pre-workouts, which a lot of people are taking. There's another 200, 300, 400 micrograms. It adds up really quickly. So on a blood panel with a lot of labs, they won't differentiate between folic acids and the different forms of folate that we have in our body. So I'd rarely see that low.
Hold on. Besides going down the complicated pathway of methylation, like, are there any overt side effects and symptoms of overdoing folic acid? Because I'm unaware of that. Or folate.
So are there any symptoms of
Yeah, adverse effects
Yeah.
of too much folic acid besides maybe complex methylation stuff.
Not really, like, because that's where you're really heading down.
That's it?
There.
All right.
Yeah, is that pathway. I think it's worth noting that you will see that a lot of people who do over supplement with folate will tell you they don't feel the best. You know what I mean? So I think you definitely can affect your neurotransmitters and that kind of thing with playing around with like high doses of folate and stuff like that. We see that all the time. But more than anything, I think it's just worthwhile noting, like, fortification's a very interesting topic when it comes to like processed foods and like what we're doing at a policy level, right? And I do feel like it's actually probably some people's way of like getting a lot of their vitamins and minerals in is actually through that, not through like the healthiest fruit, vegetable, and meat intake that they're getting. So you take the good with the bad.
In our nutrition tracker, we put in Fruit Loops here by my request, and it is fortified with 300. It's in the top 10, 313 micrograms per 100 grams of folate right there.
There you go, yeah.
And a whole bunch of other stuff. I think it's it's top 4 for iron too. Shout out to Fruit Loops.
Yeah.
Kellogg's.
Shout out to Kellogg's. That's
I
right.
will shill your Fruit Loops if you would like to sponsor me. Please call me.
Yeah.
It's a bulking diet, right? Sometimes I got 700 grams of carbs, right? Sometimes I gotta have some Fruit Loops, bro.
So yeah, so look, just to go back again, like talking about this from an overview perspective, what we've been talking about today is like how nutrition and supplements can like really fit into like what you're looking at with your full blood exam as it relates to the red blood cells, your iron panel,
Yes.
okay, how it influences that. Some of the minerals that kind of like work very well together at looking at them in addition to your iron panels, such as zinc and copper and the ceruloplasmin protein as well. So if you start looking at all this information, you can start putting together the right type of strategies around your nutrition and your supplements. Now, in saying that, and we're not going to touch on this today, but yes, there are a whole heap of reasons why these indices may be abnormal, and it's got nothing to do with nutrition. You know, so if you have like a lot of inflammation or certain diseases,
Yeah, like thalassemia minor, like I have.
we got anemia of chronic disease and stuff like that. We haven't really talked about the loss side of things. So like, you know, if a menstruating woman has a heavy period, you know, losing a lot of iron through that as well. So these are some of the things that come into play. Obviously, we're just trying to keep the discussion now. Is like a lot of people are interested in blood work, looking at some of the basics, thinking about it in terms of like these vitamins and minerals that a lot of people are aware of and potentially supplementing with. Now you can have a bit of a context as to like, you know, what you're doing with those supplements or those nutrition, like high nutrition foods.
Absolutely. And if you are confused and overwhelmed, because I can imagine how this would be a bit overwhelming for people, there are many practitioners, many of whom we follow. You can just see who we're following, us included, who you can book them in, and they will sit down with you and they will help you comprehend and understand this so you don't have to connect all the dots yourself if your doctor is not able to help you adequately, which respectfully 90-95% unfortunately are not.
Yeah, and just off the back of what you're saying there as well, and I know you say this all the time as too, is you can be within range but heading in the wrong direction for a long time. before perhaps your physician is going to do anything about it.
Sure.
So let's say we're looking at the size of your red blood cells, and it starts at 90, which is like right smack bang in the middle. It looks good. Your RDW is 11. That looks good as well. And then 6 months later, you get a test done, and that the size of your red blood cells on average now is like 93. Your RDW is 12.9. 6 months later,
Creeping up,
you're still within
creeping up.
ranges though. Doctor's not doing anything yet.
Yeah.
Doctor's not doing anything. Like there's no H's, there's no L's. There's, and so eventually, maybe we're just about to use a slippery slope fallacy right then, but maybe eventually, you're going to end up out of range, and then it's going to be time to do something about it. But you could have done something about it a long time ago.
And so the slippery slope in this case is actually, see episode 1 if you want to know what that means. It's actually relevant, and we see it with our clients. So it's based in some empirical evidence, but you also some empathy for these doctors, because we're critical of them, and some empathy that the system is not set up in a way to incentivize doctors to be proactive. So if you know the system is not built to optimize and maximize your health, longevity, then you have to align yourself with somebody who dedicates themselves to that value if you care about it.
Yeah. You may see a GP and get a referral out to a dietitian, you know what I mean? But that's most likely going to happen after the numbers are well and truly abnormal.
And then you got to wait another month for the dietitian.
Yeah.
And then you see them once a month. And then you got to pay $400 to see them for 30 minutes. And there's no accountability. And then you come to us.
Yeah. And look, I made a last note. Would you reckon we can fit in the omega-3 here?
I think we can.
Have we got time?
I do have omega-3s, omega-3 fatty acids. Okay. I credit you, my friend. I credit you for illuminating to me how important, and Dr. Bill Harris, on how important omega-3s are for what we call resolving inflammation, implicated in so many diseases and associations with diseases. And they're found in fatty cuts of fish, sardines, salmon. The acronym is SMASH. Salmon, mackerel, anchovies, herring. I'm missing one. Low mercury, high omega-3, small fish. When we consume the omega-3s, they get assimilated into our red blood cells. So you got to wait, again, 90, 100 days to be able to see your omega status. The higher this status within a range, within about the 8 to 12% ideal range, is implicated in the ideal optimal health to resolve inflammation and reduce so many diseases. And most people are very deficient in this really important nutrient that is affecting their cognition, possibly their skin, their possibly exercise performance, and even hematology. To finish off my little spiel here, have you ever seen the omega-3 theory with erythrocyte structure and function? Mm-hmm. You ever heard of this? Mm-hmm. You have. Do you mind if I read from the study to connect the dot of how omega-3 deficiency can affect this?
Go for it.
So, is omega-3 status changing the way red blood cells carry and pick up oxygen? Okay, possibly. So, I'm going to read this out. Because if red cells have to squeeze through, and they're small, and they have to squeeze through half the diameter as they go through the capillaries, the red cells have to be very flexible. So apparently, there's a theory that omega-3s help maintain the membrane to make it more flexible and adaptable. So it could be that we're mainly delivering more oxygen to tissues when you have a higher omega-3 status. This is Dr. Bill Harris, this is his theory. And so that's pretty cool because you can improve the oxygen offload and pickup with omega-3s possibly too.
Absolutely.
Have you heard of this?
Yeah. Okay. I didn't know that was his, that you were talking about there. Yeah. But yeah, he's been involved in, obviously a lot of the research on omega-3s, and he's one of the creators of the omega-3 index. So we credit him with a lot of the push to recognize it as like a cardiovascular risk factor. When you look at the studies and some of the outcomes of being like, you're in the highest quartile of the omega-3 index, you are in the lowest risk category for so many outcomes that you want to stay away from.
Yeah.
It is overwhelming, you know. And so when we look at some of the meta-analysis and some of the criticisms of fish oil supplementation and interventions, like a lot of them are warranted, but a lot of the times we have to recognize the fact it can be like this. Sometimes if someone starts with a really low omega-3 index and then you do an intervention of a certain time period, like a randomized controlled trial with fish oil supplementation, have you moved them from like 2.1% to 4.5% when we know that to get the outcome that we really want to see, they might need to get to 8%.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So there is this that we have to consider when we're looking at the research and looking at some of these outcomes from some of these trials. It's like with anything, it's nice to know where the starting status is when you're going to do an intervention. And what would be really nice is if that was looked at, controlled, and part of the consideration when you were looking at those outcomes as well. And what we're saying is, and what you alluded to before, is that like in westernized cultures, like a lot of the people have very low omega-3 indexes. Their intake of fatty fish is very low. Their status of the omega-3s so the red blood cells is a good proxy for like, so a telltale of the omega-3 status within your heart, for instance. And it's an easy thing to measure. We're just measuring the percentage of the omega-3 as the fatty acids that make up the cell membrane in that test. It's a pinprick test that you do from home. You can send it straight off to them. You order it by yourself. You don't need a practitioner involved at all. And what's really good about it is you can act on the information. You have a low omega-3 index status? Great. You want to know how to fix that?
Smash, baby.
It's not hard.
Smash, baby.
That's right. And so, yeah, like when we look at there's actually on the Omega Quant website, which is Bill Harris's omega-3 index website, there is actually a calculator there. So if you got your omega-3 index done through them,
clever.
you can put your result in and it will calculate for you. This is what we estimate in terms of the milligrams of EPA and DHA, which is the omega-3s, that you should consume daily to achieve an omega-3 index of 8% plus. Okay. When I worked it out, it ended up being around about 835 milligrams of EPA and DHA per day if we look at some of the studies that we have on hand to shift an omega-3 index over to that 8%. Okay. But inevitably, I think that's just a place to start. And what does that look like? Well, the average fish oil capsule is usually a 300 milligram, it's a 1 gram tablet with 300 milligrams worth of EPA and DHA. That's the average one. It's kind of like an industry standard. Nowadays, what you'll see is what the equivalent of like what we could call a double strength, around about the 600 milligram mark, and all the way up to a triple strength, which is around about that 900 milligram mark. So where may you want to start your supplement? It may be around that one of those triple strength capsules per day. That could suffice.
Absolutely.
If you didn't want to supplement, what would that look like in terms of like your fatty fish intake per week? Well, you're going to want to get, around about probably 350 to 500 grams, maybe of fatty fish. That might be a little bit on the excessive side there. Maybe 300 to 400 grams of fatty fish per week to get adequate EPA and DHA from that as well.
That's not much at all.
It's really not.
It's like 2 servings of salmon.
Yeah. So
Sport.
I don't take any fish oil supplement. This is an anecdote, people, for episode 1. I don't take any fish oil supplementation, omega-3 index of 12% because I eat a lot of sardines.
Look at this guy flexing on them.
Yeah,
12%.
flex. I challenge my clients to beat it, and I think Sophia beat me actually.
Really?
So, yeah, I'm pretty sure she
I'm
did.
coming for your crown.
Yeah, I know. But look, I can tell more stories, actually, more anecdotes. And that's like one of my guys who swears that he loves sardines as much as me and ate pretty much as many tins a week as what I did. We were pretty surprised by his result, which was only around about 5-point-something%.
Yeah, same brand though?
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
Yeah, brand shouldn't make that much of a difference. Shouldn't.
Okay.
But needless to say, we were both really surprised by that, and I don't think we supplemented. He just went crazy on the sardines for a while. But yeah, the point of this would say this is a marker which is very easy to measure, to get a starting point from. It's very easy to address. It has significant outcomes in terms of like your risk of certain health outcomes as well. And it's high on our list of recommended tests.
Super high. It's pay the $120, $130. It's definitely worth it. And the practical implications are so practical. Just a little note for the plant-based people or people who are not consuming animals. There's EPA, DHA, but there's also ALA, alpha lipoic acid, and this needs to be converted to EPA and DHA. And long story short, this conversion is really inefficient and poor, and it's quite unlikely to show a meaningful increase in your omega-3 status with high ALA intake. It's really a good idea to be adaptable possibly with ethics and morals and consider an omega-3 supplement or an algae oil.
Yeah.
Just a little side note for the minority of people who that might apply to.
Definitely. You don't want to have plant-based EPA and DHA. Algae oil is your friend.
Yes. Your best friend. So salmon, mackerel, sardines being high in calcium as well with the bones. So you can tick a lot of boxes when you go the
High
whole
in
food
iron,
route.
like what we just talked about before.
Exactly. B vitamins.
Sardines beat red meat.
I learned what I see the other day. Salmon surprised me. I think salmon salmon's got like more potassium than a banana. Yeah, I think per serving. I think I read that.
Maybe.
No, it's true.
Oh, okay.
I'm pretty sure it's true, bro.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. So just surprising.
So let's talk about like retesting, right? Because people often ask you this. It's like, well, when should I retest? And they're eager to do it. Okay, let's say you get like a result which needs acting upon. You set up a bit of a game plan, and then the client goes, "How quickly can I retest?" Well, we need to really consider like the life cycle of the red blood cell. Okay, and so there's no point retesting these markers that relate to the red blood cells within 3 months.
Yeah.
You've got to give it time. Like the body has to create these new red blood cells. You've got to wait for the other ones to die off. And then you can retest. You can retest your iron panel a lot quicker than that. Do you know what I mean? So if you wanted to retest iron more frequently, you could definitely go for it. But the full blood exam as it relates to red blood cells, from the perspective of seeing how your intervention's going, you're probably going to want to wait a little bit longer.
And so if there's a sense of urgency, you could look at within the next 3, 4, 5 months. If things are going well, you might look at every 9 to 12 months. But I would be very wary and I would ask yourself the question. If you say you care about your health, you value your health and longevity and wellness, yet you service and pay more for get your car serviced than you do your body, you must confront this cognitive dissonance and friction in your mind that you are ignoring. You say you value it, yet your actions and behaviors do not represent it. Some food for thought.
Absolutely.
That's it.
You got anything else?
We can be here for hours.
No, I think, look.
I got a lot, bro. So do you.
I think
coming
we've got some guests we want to bring on to like maybe touch on specific parts of health and blood work. So I think it'd be good to hear from them. But I think for today, like we've covered off some of the main nutrients that I think people recognize from maybe the supplements they're taking or the reasons why they're looking at certain foods within their diet, how it relates to looking at it on a blood panel. Some of the things to take into account when you're going to get your blood work drawn, thinking about hydration.
Yes.
Looking at retesting, what length of time, looking at not waiting for these numbers to be completely abnormal. Like the trend is your friend. You know what I mean? If you can see trends heading in the wrong direction, like get in front of it now.
And if you're still a bit, there's a lot of things in the air. What about this test? What about that test? We're going to put in our Discord a PDF that we give to our clients on what blood test to get and what criteria to look out for. Like, we haven't even talked about how stress and sleep deprivation and all these other confounding variables that can affect your blood test. That's all listed in there. And how do you justify to the doc that you can get some of these tests? Because you're going to have some trouble. Most people do. We've put that all in there. We've solved that problem in the PDF. It's in the Discord. Link below. That's all I got. Much love.